And we are live. Welcome back to the Two Turtle Tom Show, live every Thursday night at 8 p.m. And tonight I have a special co host with me, William Espenshade of Kapidolo Farms. Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited about a lot of things going on in my life, and this is one of them.
Yeah, awesome. So we are going to have Sushmita Kaur with us tonight. It is very early though in India. It is like 5:30 a.m. So she has not yet joined us, but we are expecting to talk all about her work with turtles and tortoises in India. And Will has been following Sushi, as she likes to go by, for a little bit of time. So, what impressed you, Will, about Sushi and her work?
Well, as we were talking a little bit before the podcast started, she was one of the authors on the paper describing the significance of finding an impressed tortoise in northern India, and
Mhm.
it was certainly a range extension for them, and that's always been a tortoise of high interest for me. And she's published a lot of things. I've followed some of her narratives that she's published about her tortoise and turtle conservation work, and um, she carries that forward with a lot of insight that I failed to use when I was trying to establish
Mm,
conservation programs. And so it's like I'm sort of past that part in my life where I want to do something intense in the field in some remote part of the world, but she's like right on top of that. That's her strong occupational pursuit, and it seems like she's doing it really well. So maybe it's
yeah,
like a vicarious wildlife biologist through a woman in India, but I'm also a vicarious wildlife biologist through other people around the world. But she really stands out.
cool. Well, we are looking forward to her joining us, hopefully anytime. So let's take a look at the chat. Tonight we've got Eliza Ann is with us. Eliza, good to see you. And Sean McZoo, Exotic Pets of the Reptile Show Reporter podcast and live show on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Mikey Ben is here. Um, CNC Tortoises, that's Mike Chan. He is here with us tonight. He works with stars and radiated tortoises out in the Vancouver area. Wes Coleman, so glad you could join us, Wes. And Panther Palette is also here, and Sebastian. So lots of regulars. We are waiting for Sushi to join us. She is a turtle biologist working in India, particularly the northeast corner of India. Really interesting part. Normally you think of India as kind of this triangular shaped country, but in the very northeastern edge, it actually kind of juts east, north of Bangladesh and kind of south of the Himalaya mountains. And there's all kinds of fascinating turtles and tortoises up that way, aren't there, Will?
Yeah, it's it's an area where three large geographic regions come together: the main Indian subcontinent, the Indochina Peninsula, and then mainland China. Um, there's a mix of fauna from all those regions, so it makes it a pretty interesting area to work. I have a friend who works in a NGO in Assam, which is the state right next to the one that our guest is from, and he's talked about that quite a bit. And I'm good friends with a guy that. Sorry, I got distracted looking at
No
the
worries.
comments. So, anyways, he's now he works for USAID, but he was a tiger biologist in the Bangladesh Sundarbans, and he too brought to me the idea of how unique this whole geographic region is.
Hmm.
Um, so that's it. So Mikey Ben asked, how did I come across Sushmita? She published a lot of interesting work. I read turtle things from all over the world, and a lot of people in India publish in English, so I tend to be a heavier follower of things going on in India. And there's a lot of turtles and tortoises in India of great interest. So um, that's how I came across her.
Yeah. And we are excited to talk to her. There is definitely a bit of a time difference. It's currently like 5:37 in the morning in India right now, and we've done our best to make sure we were on time and getting that time zone connection right, but it's her Friday morning, May 3rd. It's our May 2nd. So she's not joined us yet, but we really hope that she can join us and we can talk about turtles of India. And yeah, exactly, Eliza. Dedication. So um, let's talk about one of the really cool finds. It's not often that a tortoise or turtle species is found to occur in a new country. And that's what happened a few years ago. And Sushmita is authored a paper with some other collaborators on this new tortoise to India. So could you tell us a little bit about what that tortoise is and why it's so special?
Well, they found an impress tortoise. It was I Facebook friended the guy who actually found it,
Yeah, Bunty
and it was
Cow.
brought quite a bit of notoriety to him.
Yeah.
He has some level of involvement in wildlife conservation, and so an official ID or positive ID sort of solidified his first awareness of it. And it's interesting because impressed tortoises are not super abundant, from my understanding, anywhere that they occur. But that could be an artifact of using them for food or traditional Chinese medicine and all. It's a species I've had a long interest in. I wrote an article about them in the California Turtle and Tourist Club's newsletter like 1990. So I guess that qualifies as a long-term interest.
Yeah, I would
Uh,
say
I I worked for a curator at the Chappie Zoo, and he was really interested in them. He's the first person to breed the Manoria Emmys fayeri at the Honolulu Zoo. Um, that genus sort of captures my imagination, um, though I'm not going to fool around with turning the camera around the window right out of the room I'm in as my colony of Manoria Emmys fayeri, and right now rabbits are raiding the food dish.
that.
Um, And when the tourists walk over to reinvestigate what's going on, the rabbits flee. I think they can sense that the Manoria would make a meal out of them if it could. So, anyways, getting
Interesting.
back to Northeast India, um, it's in the article I wrote in 1990. Jim Buskirk was a co-author on that, and some wildlife show like that was really popular, all the Mutual of Omaha and wildlife shows like that in the 70s and 80s. Somebody was going through market for food animals in China, and there was a number of impressed tortoises there. So, how far north they extend or east is an interesting topic, and this find definitely firmed up that they get pretty far east relative to um, say Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam and all. So a big range extension.
Um, Tell us what the impressed tortoise looks like.
Hmm. Well, um, a lot of tortoises could be described as sort of brown. Impressed tortoises have color flecking in their shell, sort of like how people impress redfoots to have the yellow margins of each scoot. Impressed tortoises have a darker margin and a light-colored central part of the scoot. The each scoot is sort of depressed, so that's why the common name is impressed tortoise. The fenestra, the bone underlying the shell, doesn't fully close even in an adult animal, so it's always a little bit open. Like a sulcata, once they get up to about a foot long, I mean, they're like rock hard. All the fenestra have closed up, which is the gap in the bone underneath the keratin scutes. Impressed tortoises, that never apparently fully closes. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a couple out there where it has, but typically it doesn't. So that sort of creates the question why. Maybe they have a very calcium poor diet. They eat a lot of mushrooms, and mushrooms are really horrible for calcium content. They have a very poor calcium phosphorus ratio. It's like 1 to 40 with some mushrooms, anyways. And there's the idea that they eat a lot of mushrooms. However, there are people that have raised them up that don't feed any mushrooms or very limited mushrooms. They blend mushrooms with acorn squash and other things. One keeper in Texas had reported he didn't feed any mushrooms at all, from very small hatchlings to 4 to 6 inches, and all his tortoises looked really good. I had a small group that were still pretty hatchling size. The opening in the plastron where the yolk was still pretty apparent. And I talked to a lot of people what they were feeding, and they all said, "Oh, a lot of mushrooms." So I fed a lot of mushrooms, and they slowly became soft and collapsed and died. I followed up with those people, and they say, "Oh, yeah, all mine died." So there's an important lesson in asking at least 2 or 3 questions when you ask somebody for help. What did you do, and how did it work out? A good question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's when I dove into what's the nutritional content of mushrooms. Their alleged favorite mushroom in the wild are oyster mushrooms. Apparently, there's been a couple in situ studies of them now, one in Thailand and one in Cambodia, perhaps other places. But apparently, they eat bamboo shoots as well, or have been seen eating bamboo shoots, carrion, snails, things like that. But apparently, they spend a lot of time eating mushrooms.
That's really interesting. We know the tortoises that I work with, hinchbacks, are also known to eat mushrooms, but they also eat a wide variety of other things.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is try to share my screen and share some photos from iNaturalist. And there's actually even a video here. So for people that are not familiar with this species,
that's really awesome.
Here is what they look like. This particular one is really pretty, distinguished. You can see a couple things there. Number one, it's got a huge bite out of its leg. But yeah, yes, there are a lot of brown tortoises, but man, I can appreciate the subtlety and the light versus dark contrast. And then they also have these like really interesting serrated marginal scoots. Will was saying the fenestrae don't entirely close. So what we mean there is that underneath the keratin, which is the outer layer, there's a layer of bone. And you're saying in each scoot that bone doesn't close? Is that on the carapace? Or
well, the bone does not line up with the scoots.
Oh.
So that the structure is stronger. Like if all the seams lined up, it wouldn't be as strong as if the seams are opposite. And so, like, if you look at my hand, you see all the gaps between the fingers. The gap in a tortoise shell would be the fenestra, and most
Yeah.
tortoises, as they grow, it all
Yep.
closes, and it's a solid shield of bone. Another interesting thing about this species is they build nest mounds like Manoria emys fayeri and Manoria emys. Um, so that's one of the. I mean, there are a lot of ways to interpret parental influence on the eggs. There are what I think Sonora mud turtles or yellow mud turtles bury in during the summer, lay eggs, and they're sitting with their eggs over the summer. I forget one of the mud turtles in the Midwest. Anyway, so that's some kind of parental care where it's an active physical participation, um, as opposed to, say, evolutionary parental care, which is all the different diapause. So these guys, they build a nest mound and then lay their eggs into it. They've been bred in captivity by a few people in the U.S. and Europe. There's some good articles in a couple magazines about it. And
But
apparently there's some
go ahead.
German people that are producing them in such numbers that they actually have reduced the eggs they incubate because they can't find homes for them all.
Wow.
Um,
And this
so
is, as far as the pet trade goes, these were imported in some numbers long ago, but very difficult to establish, and many people have failed. Is that safe
yeah.
to say?
So as a teenager, I was a member of the Bay Area Turtle and Tortoise Society, San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the members was a guy Bob McMorris, who was a zoologist at some level at the San Francisco Zoo, and he wrote an article in a turtle magazine called Colonia, which is long since defunct, and he called it Impresa disease,
Hmm.
and it had to do with how difficult it was to establish them in captivity. So he just called it in general Impresa disease. So that was what probably sometime in the 1970s. And when I was at the Philly Zoo, our curator, who's also a vet, got a hold of some, and apparently when they're sold for food, it's by weight, and so the gut of the tortoise was filled with sand, so it was heavier when someone bought it, so that
Hmm.
corrupted that one's life.
Hmm.
Um, I forget if it was an animal that Sean worked with at the Fresno Zoo or Kevin at the Philly Zoo, but also there was a large hardwood thorn that punctured the cecum, and so that was the end of that one's life.
Sorry.
Um,
Just let me
so
stop sharing here. Sorry. There we go.
okay.
I was trying to see if she sent us a message, but it does not, it does not look like either she probably had some technical difficulties or we just were off on the time. So Will and I are here and we're going to chat turtles and tortoises. So we're talking about tortoises from India. We're talking about the impressed tortoise right now from India. And we didn't used to think they occurred in India. Typically, we thought they were a farther east species, but our guest was, we were hoping to have Sushmita on to tell us a little bit about the discovery of the tortoise that we're talking about. And Will has kept this species in the past, and that's what it looks like. So I'm going to bring up the range map of the impressed tortoise, um, which is a little bit obscured, but yeah, we can kind of see where these guys live.
Yeah. So the first range map that I ever recall seeing them is the one that John Iverson published in Range Maps of Turtles and Tortoises of the World. It was a spiral bound thing.
Hmm.
So Sushmita is also involved with the black gray softshell turtle recovery. For a while, it was only considered to be in a pond or basin at some kind of religious shrine. And then I think Peter Prashog and someone else found some in a river, but it was hard to work that out, so it was done by genetic analysis. And I see Wendy asked, are they smaller than Emmys and Fayeri? Yes, they are. Their maximum size is 12 to 14 inches, and they're much lighter.
They're still a big tortoise.
Yeah. Not like a Western Hermans or anything. So there's somebody in Florida that's bred them off and on, and I think the Fort Worth Zoo has bred them, and then Oklahoma City Zoo, I think. And I think Ron Tremper was early in breeding them, maybe the first in the U.S., but I'm not going to bet on my recollection on that. And so they're pretty unusual, pretty interesting. So there's other tortoises in India as well. There are elongated tortoises. There's Manoria Fayeri, and then there's Instituto Travicorni or Travicornii. I'm not sure how to say it right. And so there's a lot of aquatic turtles in India, like a huge range of sizes and taxonomic background. I'm sort of a tortoise myopic person myself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's interesting genera like VJ Chelis or VJ Kellys. Just some of these turtles that I've seen don't fit well with other species. Maybe they were included in other Asian genera, but they've been elevated. And we don't ever see them in the pet trade because India does not seem to export tortoises or turtles as pets. That's not something they appear to do, or really have ever done, maybe.
Yeah, when I made that little off the top of my head list, of course, there's the Indian star tortoise.
Yeah.
So yeah, India is very protective, relatively effectively of most of their wildlife. Well, I have a friend who's a fish importer, and apparently fish are exported pretty readily.
Okay.
So I guess they drew the line somewhere, and fish are on the it's okay line side of the line, and everything else is not. It's so restrictive in a sense that if you're a wildlife biologist and you collect tissue samples to do a genetic analysis at your lab, say in the US, like maybe you collected, I don't know, little muscle tissue or something, or a toe, you need full-blown CITES export documentation for that. And if it's not a CITES protected animal, you still need to go through a pretty rigorous export routine with the wildlife authorities in India.
So Wes is wondering about the nest guarding. So Manoria, there's 3 different taxa, and I did not know that Manoria impressa also guarded their nest. But what do you think, Will?
Well, how long? A couple days to a couple weeks. The first reproduction of them in captivity in North America was at the Honolulu Zoo. And the curator there sort of tested the responsiveness of protecting the nest by walking a stuffed monitor up towards the female that was on the nest mound, and the female rushed at it, mouth agape, willing to bite it. I would imagine that the tortoises have some kind of feedback, like they're smelling the ground, and if it's like they laid today and 2 days later it rains and all the smell is gone, maybe they'll wander off. But that's a very speculative thing for me to say. I don't know that there's a good, I mean, this is a question for Sushmita. How long have they noticed them nest guarding in the semi-wild conditions they have? they have a captive population that they breed for release. And one of the interesting things I was going to ask her is how they sort out release sites because
Mhm.
they have a pretty rigorous protocol. Um, so I'm already drifting away from your question, Wes, but
No.
at least a couple days to a few weeks.
Yeah.
It's not like until they hatch.
Hmm. So you have Fairei. Fair. How do you say that?
Well, I say it Faireye. I have
Fairei.
Faireye and Emmys
Fairei.
Emmys.
You have both.
Uh, Yeah, I have both of those.
So what's the
Two
difference?
point. Well, the Faireye maximum adult size is pretty big. Um, I I've heard as big as 110 pounds. I've only seen about 80 pounds.
Wow.
There's a breeder in Florida that's been breeding them for some 30 years. Um, Probably the longest term consistent breeding of them, um, likely globally. Um, and yeah, so of my colony, the females are bigger than the males. I had a male that got pretty big, but they get so distracted with mating that they don't eat and put on the weight. And of course, the females have the burden of developing and carrying eggs, and they're not super resistant to mating. So, unlike,
Okay.
say, alligator snapping turtles, where the male is much bigger than the female, I have to wonder if those females are super resistant to mating. So the male needs to be bigger. There's also
Hmm.
niche partitioning with the difference in size of adults.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyhow, with the Manoria emisferi, my females are 75 to 85 pounds,
Wow.
and um, they're they creep up on you, and they're perfectly willing to bite your foot. I'm a flip flop guy, live in the San Diego lifestyle, and I have to be super conscientious when I'm in their enclosure. And the Emmys, the biggest I think they get us in the 40 to 45, maybe 50-pound range.
Oh.
The Emmys I have are on the smaller side. They had a rough life. They grew up in the Central Valley of California, so very hot in the summer and
Mm.
cold and muggy in the winter. Um, I have some that I grew up from eggs that hatched in, I think, 2016 or 2017, and they're really nice wild type morphology. Um,
Now, what do you mean by
so,
that?
well, you can see rings in growth on the scoop, but
Mm.
the overall shell is consistently domed. It's not like there was growth and then a cessation of growth and then growth again. Um, and that happens a lot to where I wouldn't call the scutes pyramided, but they're
Mm.
certainly chunky looking.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I mean, I'd heard people talk about the scoot patterns and stuff like that, but I didn't realize there was such a difference in the size of those animals, of
I,
those subspecies. I mean, that's a big, big difference.
yeah,
It Go ahead.
I'm willing to be corrected, but that's what I've seen with animals that I've
Sure.
seen in person. I'm not trying to recall something I've read.
Yeah, yeah. Are the bigger ones from either higher elevations or more northern latitudes?
They are more northern latitude,
Hmm.
um, and as far as elevation goes, that's possible. Um, there was a paper that I ran across and read, and I sent a copy of it to Chuck Schaefer, who has subsequently passed away. But he had a huge library of everything ever published about any Manoria he had, without regard to the language it was published in.
Mm.
And one paper that I came across that was new to him was somebody suggesting that it was actually a cline. They weren't subspecies, but further south and perhaps lower elevation, they were smaller, and that's Manoria emmys. as is traditionally considered a subspecies, and more northern is Manoria hemisphaeri. The last
Okay.
IUCN list of species that's published by Colonial Conservation and Biology
Mm-hmm.
didn't recognize that paper as changing the taxonomic status of them.
Mm.
I can only figure that by default because there was no mention of that paper, and they're still distinct subspecies in that list of taxonomy.
When when was that paper published? Not the checklist, but
Yeah, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago.
okay. So recent,
Um,
recent enough, but
yeah.
not recent that they would have missed it or something like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I see what you're
Yeah.
driving at.
I mean,
Um,
'cause sometimes they might have just published it when they were working on it, and if they started with basal animals, they might have missed it. But yeah, interesting. I mean, it seems like the tortoise and turtle world, we're doing a lot of splitting of species out right now. I mean, think of all the Kinixis in the past 15 years. Cora just was, or Cora amboinensis was just split. So yeah, a lot of splits being recognized, and that gets us more species
well,
in the
in the
world.
western desert, tortoise has been broken up into 3 species now, and
Yep,
uh, alligator snappers, I think, are 2 or maybe 3, and um,
yep,
there's I've been in some pretty heated debates about that,
yeah. On social
and
media, or
well, just with other turtle nerds and
mm-hmm,
people directly involved with conservation,
mm-hmm,
and the idea is when you refine taxonomic status and make more subunits, um, or break things out, it's easier to create legislative protection for them
yeah,
because now you're not talking about something that's, say, the whole Mississippi Basin. You're talking about something that might be, just Tennessee Valley or whatever. And so it's easier pill to swallow. And it may also be that reflects the practical reality that those in this area are critically endangered and the rest of the range is not. So it's a way to bring legislative authority to protection.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Certainly makes
of
it
course,
more easy. I was always surprised that the Endangered Species Act can protect certain populations of an animal and not others, but it's just confusing, is what it ends up happening.
excuse me.
Like what the some of the gopher tortoises are federally endangered, but only the ones in Georgia or something like that. Tortoise Wendy says, I think Palomedusa went through a huge split too.
Oh,
Absolutely, it did. Um,
yes.
yeah, Subrufa was a pan-continent taxa, and that's been split into many, many different species, and that is in the checklist, the Colonian checklist published by, yeah, the I think the Turtle Conservancy is involved in that
Yes, it
publication as
is.
well, right? And so it's this joint effort of colonial conservation and biology and the turtle
Yeah, there's a
conservancy.
lot of collaborators in that
Yeah, yeah,
publication.
and Anders Rodin, I think, is heads it up. And
Yeah.
there's a good Colonian podcast episode with him talking about putting together that book. That's the one that Michael Scribstead does. Um, but yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in African species, there's a lot of interesting Palomedusa that were split, and also some interesting Pelusias. So there's a lot of fascinating taxonomic work going on there with those African species, for sure.
I,
Yep, go ahead, Will.
well, Africa, I guess, is a pretty complicated place to work because there's a lot of political geographic units. that don't necessarily respect mountain range and river boundaries that would prohibit one species. Um, anyways, the
Yep.
boundary lines of countries don't align with the geographic range of animals. And so, if you want to study the animal and you want to explore all of its geographic range, you might end up being involved in a country that's pretty hostile to wildlife biologists, and next country over might welcome you with open arms and happy to have your help.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's very difficult, at least historically, it's been difficult to study the whole range of a species like Paleomedusa. So you can see what would have happened is you just kind of lump them all. So Wendy is wanting to know: is there a governing body that's the final say in deciding species? How does that work?
um, there is a governing body. It's I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's based with the IUCN in Switzerland, although I'm perfectly willing to be wrong with that. And what they do is they put together specialist groups for different taxonomic units, like, say, bats or rodents or elephants or turtles and tortoises. And then there's a specialization group of people who review all that, and they have a history of publishing or doing the lab work to distinguish different species, and they collaborate and put together a publication that's, I think, traditionally going to always be accepted by the governing body, because the governing body isn't a specialist in all the different taxonomic groups. Um, I remember hearing Peter Pritchard talk about it and how it was sometimes a little too slow for his satisfaction. He broke out um, Indotestudo forsteni by publishing about it in Reptiles magazine
Really?
because scientific literature was too slow.
Oh
And he
wow.
did all the work that you would do for a scientific publication. He did a Carl Sagan treatment, so it was easy to read and understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up being the publication used to break out forsteni from elongata or travacorn.
Oh, that's really
And
interesting.
so I guess there's a number of ways you can push that envelope. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, and then there's some Australian guy, I've seen videos of him, Raymond Hauser, who's sort of like, I think it'd be okay to call him a wackadoodle.
Yeah,
Although
I've heard about this guy. I've read
he
some of the things.
he he splits things crazy and describes all kind of species, and the same international body of specialists don't recognize a lot of what he does. So um, I know Peter Paul Van Dyke, Huey Fritz, um, Anders Rodin. I'm sure Pritchard was on it when he was alive. Um, these are all the experts that come together. Huey Fritz is a German scientist who has developed a lot of techniques and methodologies for looking at DNA. And um, I don't recall Peter Paul Van Dyke's academic specialty, but he's been involved with international conservation. Um, I think he's well, all these guys sort of bounce around. At one time, he was involved with the IUCN, maybe Wildlife Conservation Society, but his productivity has been pretty consistent. So
Yeah. Um, I
I'm going
mean,
to take a sip of water.
yeah, no, that's no problem. So we welcome everyone tonight. Will Espenshade. We had scheduled to have Sushmita Carr with us. However, when we started, it was 5:30 Friday morning. So um, we may, I think we've missed Sushmita. We will try to reschedule her And so yeah, we're just kind of taking your questions, turtles and tortoises of India, and Will are having a and I are having a conversation. So if you have anything about turtles and tortoises, jump in the chat. We'd love to talk to you and learn what you are interested in. Um, but we were just talking about official names of turtles and tortoises, and I will bring up a term, scientific consensus, right?
Okay, there you go.
Um, yes, there are groups, and the IUCN and the Turtle and Tortoise Specialist Group. Yeah, if they're naming a species and ranking it, then that's a really good endorsement of scientific consensus, right? But that's what they do. I mean, they get together, they read all the literature, and if someone publishes something wacko, maybe someone will refute that with additional research. And you get all the experts in the room that have read all the papers. They do their best to objectively evaluate the evidence and come up with scientific consensus in these big groups, and that's how it becomes a standard. I know in plants there are very few of these bodies that do these kinds of things, so it's good,
Oh,
at least in the animal world, they have a specialist group. I mean, there are a few for plants like orchids and things like that, but trees, but it's not as cut and dry. And people change their minds too. Maybe new evidence comes out and they change their minds. So
oi.
that's what makes
Yeah,
science fun.
change rooms so I could sit down.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
there's been a big stir up of bird common names because a lot of bird common
Oh,
names
I know about that.
had tit and breast and cock and all these other words that have since been sort of turned into weird slang. But I guess when the birds were initially named, it was a perfectly acceptable thing. Um, and I guess that all is
Well,
is
I
it
don't
more
know.
by
Have you heard
DNA
the?
testing now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's Wendy. There's a lot of criteria um, that has been developed, and it's called phylogenetics, and so there's measurements of how separate are these things in terms of looking at mitochondria DNA and nuclear DNA to make like a clock. How long have these been not mixing with those? And that's part of the equation. There's still there we go. Someone got it. International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature. Um, so thank you. And so there's different species or taxon groups have slightly different criteria. Um, Oddly enough, I'm mostly familiar with geckos because when I was at school, the um, the primary gecko guy in the world who contributes to all this was in the department I was in biology, and they developed a lot of the tools and into Dracaena, but even
Yeah. So I
the
want to talk about the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature.
okay.
What that organization does, and there's an International Botanical Code that's the same thing. What they do is establish the rules for naming animals
Oh,
and who gets to name an animal or name a plant or what name it should be based on who is the correct author. Um, it not should it be a species. So they're only evaluating, did the people follow the rules of how to name a plant or an animal. They're not saying, oh, their study is bad. They're just saying, did they follow the rules right? So say if like in the case of uh, Asclepius syriaca, which is common milkweed, right? So that's a silly name because it means it's from Syria. So we have this plant, common milkweed, all over Eastern North America with a name that it's from Syria. Why wouldn't we change that? Well, because the International Botanical Code says you have to use the first name that it was described as. You can't use another name. So that's what the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature is. They establish the rules for naming. They don't set the taxonomy. They don't make the taxonomic decisions.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, a lot of ego is involved in naming
No,
animals.
scientists are objective, Will.
I'm sorry. And so one time I suggested that it ought to just be like a license plate or like a book card catalog where the leading and trailing numbers sort of clue you in to the subject matter all the way down to the author. And I said that to Dr. Bauer at Villanova when I was there, and he he did not give me a look like, well, that's not a good. Well, that's a good idea. Will, no, it's quite the opposite. Mostly because there's a lot of value in there. There's a guy who runs the world's largest reptile zoo in Florida who boasts that he bought a name of a gecko that honored his son, and he arranged that through Dr. Bauer. So isn't that great?
That's nice.
And there's a split off of Western desert tortoises that's named for Eric Good, because he contributed a lot to the value of conservation of those and other animals. So it's not unheard of to buy your name on an animal, sort of like, I don't know, the Staples Center where some sport is being played. But as you were pointing out, Tom, someone else can't come along with more money and have it renamed
Correct.
on their
That's
behalf.
not allowed.
So yeah, that's a good thing.
And that's what, yeah, that's the rules that the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, um, basically sets. And, they're not the police, but, if someone screws up, they'll say, yeah, they didn't do it right.
Well, there's
Yeah.
not that many venues to publish things, and so editors are
Yeah.
usually going to be adherent to whatever the ICZN says, and
Yeah.
uh,
And so the other really interesting thing is that we were talking about the Forsten's tortoise, right? They're from the island of Sulawesi, and they were always considered a subspecies for a long time of
well,
the
some
elang,
even considered it
elongata.
like an introduced population of Travicorn tortoises.
Interesting.
Um,
But if you look at the name of Tranvicor or of Forsteni, that name was given to it in the 1840s.
oh, I
So
see.
somebody in the 1840s published this tortoise should be Indotestudo forstenii, or Forstenii. I don't remember if it's two eyes or one, but the scientific community said, "Nah, you're wrong." And maybe for 150 years, that person was, you know what, and the more recent information that the DNA work was done, and scientists today said, yes, this should be a, a separate species. Well, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature says, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, you think it's it's its own separate species, but in 1844, they also thought it was a separate species, and they named it Forstenii, and that name sticks. So
Yeah.
that name is resurrected, and whoever wrote that description 150 years ago, it's like they're resurrected their work is resurrected from the dead almost, and their name will be actually added to what's called the authority. That's the names of people that name the plant or animal after the scientific name. So that's a little inside baseball, but just kind of a cool story how that works.
Hmm.
Lamarck, not Lamarck, Rafinesque was a famous early splitter of Eastern North American animals. And some of his names are being resurrected after 200 years.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, because DNA work is showing, you know what? Rafinesque was a super splitter back in the early 1800s. Everyone's like, yeah, no, he's just wasted his time describing new species based on really minuscule characteristics. And DNA, 200 years later, says, bring it on. What's,
I see
what's,
Leo
what's
asks if
next?
impresa are known to eat snails, and yes, they are.
And so that's my theory, Will, about the mushrooms, is that any tortoise that's eating mushrooms, what also comes out when it's mushroom time? Mollusks.
Yep.
Mollusks have a lot of calcium, so they take a bite of a mushroom, they eat a snail.
Well,
Keep
I,
doing
I,
that.
I sometimes wonder if snail eating led to mushroom eating, because at least I know eastern box turtles know if they hang out at the base of a tree, snails are going up and down the tree for whatever microclimate thing they're doing. And so I have to also imagine species in other parts of the world figure out where snails accumulate and go there. And snails, I've rarely seen wild mushrooms that have been up for a while that aren't full of slugs and snails. And so, yeah, what you're saying just hits dead on, makes sense. Um,
There's an anecdote in one of the papers about Connexus, the giant African land snail, which we're not allowed to have um, in North America, or at least in the U.S. They're super cool, man. I mean, they get like just, well, they get bigger than I can show you on the screen. Um, but the people going out to find African land snails for food also run into the hingeback tortoises, and
oh,
the hingeback tortoises were like the secondary catch that they were bringing back to the market. They were going out for the land snails, finding the tortoises at the same time, and then selling them all as food, or in some cases, pets. I've got a buddy in Nigeria. He's like 15 years old, Tahani. He's buying home hingebacks from the local market there. So um, just fascinating
yeah,
stuff.
Pedrick, that's exactly what I was driving at. Um, yeah, the mushrooms are sort of like the restaurant for snails and slugs, and well, let's also eat some mushroom too. Exactly.
Well, I'm just checking in on Sushmita. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us. It looks like she was active on Facebook 6 hours ago, so I'm guessing we just had a time difference. However, if we are off in an hour, maybe in about 5 minutes, she might join us. I don't know. She's still not saying she's active on Facebook. The Facebook Messenger says she's active about 6 hours ago, so she's probably sleeping and resting. And we will try to reschedule so she can join us. But Will are just hanging out. Will and I are just hanging out. Will Espenshade, Kapidolo Farms. Will's in just north of San Diego in California. I'm Two Turtle Tom, love hingeback tortoises. We're just talking about turtles and tortoises. How are things going in your world? Let us know. Um, what else is on your mind, Will? Anything exciting happening with Capitola Farms?
Well, I contemplating purchasing a large property so I can get animals outside and um, grow a lot more of the foods that go into the backyard harvest product line, and maybe a greenhouse with vertical towers to grow the different weeds and things. And um, make it
That's exciting.
my own organic farm, but
That
we'll
is
see.
super exciting. Um, I am going to be getting my community garden plot where I'm going to be trying out raising violets and a few other things. So I'm excited about that. I think it's still 1 week away. Um, it got pretty warm here, and so I haven't mowed my backyard. Um, I'm letting that stuff grow, and every morning I come out, pick dandelion greens, go straight to the hingebacks. What do? First, like I said, they eat the stems first, not the flower, the stem, and then they'll eat the leaves. But the hingebacks absolutely love fresh dandelion greens.
Yeah, and you shared a pretty interesting observation with me, how they like the stem between the flower and the base of the leaves. Um,
Yeah,
I keep thinking about that.
the
So I see
peduncle.
we have two sides of one coin on redfoots here.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Pedrick, your eggs weren't viable, and Wendy just got some outside for the first time for the year. Um, yeah, tortoise reproduction can and care can be what do they call that? A roller coaster of joy and despair.
Absolutely. I
I have a
had
bunch
a
of
Go ahead.
I have a bunch of pancake tortoise eggs right now incubating. I have 4 colonies with 2 to 3 females in each colony, and there's a lot of eggs in that incubator, and it's been a long time since anybody hatched. Yeah. I have
Hmm,
some Manoria Emmys eggs incubating now too.
nice.
Um, all the fader eye eggs shrunk,
Hmm.
so they probably weren't viable, but the Emmys eggs look good. Yeah.
Do they have large eggs for a large tortoise?
Yeah, they're ping pong ball or bigger,
Okay.
maybe a little bigger, and they're round.
Round. That's
Um,
interesting. The Homiana and Erosa are more round.
okay.
Really interesting.
A long time ago, I consistently got eggs from a female Arosa, and they were a different diameter from 3 axes, um, through the center one way, through the center another way, and then end to end.
Yeah, they're not
Um,
perfectly round,
yeah, yeah.
but
Well, and there's a lot of
rounded.
variation within populations. Like some yellowfoot egg or redfoot eggs are perfectly spherical, and some are quite elongate.
Huh.
Um, there was recently a paper looking at other characteristics, but it defined the redfoots north of the central mountain range in Colombia as pretty darn distinct from those on the southern side of that same mountain range. Southern side was more Amazon basin like, and the northern population was a lot different, but they didn't talk about egg shape in that.
Hmm. We have a lot to learn, don't we?
Well, it's a lot of work to do wildlife studies.
Yeah.
And like if you look at all the wildlife studies for, say, sea turtles or marine turtles versus others, there's a lot more because it's a more sexy thing to spend time on the beach and um,
Hmm.
then, I don't know, tromping through a forest with terrestrial leeches and mosquitoes somewhere in
Yeah.
Southeast Asia.
Yeah. No, that's awful. And what there's 7 species of sea turtles, 300 plus the other ones.
Yeah.
Panther palette. Spring is extra special with redfoots, and what I wanted to put, thank you. Uh, that's kind of fun. You ever notice different behaviors when you first put up your tortoises outside? Yours live around year round, but you've been in colder climates before.
Are you asking Wendy or
No,
Pedrick or Marcy?
I'm asking you. So Podrick says his adults are eating tons of greens, which they normally just don't eat.
Yeah. Normally turn their noses up. Yeah, redfoots I have. They're unwilling to be picky. I keep them all in groups of 3 to 5, and the last one to the food plate is going to get a second choice. So usually they eat from one edge to the other. Oh,
Now I have to cough. Excuse me.
so
Got a great question here. Sean McKeon, um, and that is one of your mentors, right? Will?
yeah, I work for Sean at the Fresno Chaffee Zoo. So Chris Manis at Dalton State breeds a lot of Barossa, and Jeremy at the Canixies Cooperative has bred a lot of them. I'm sure there are others, just those are the two people I'm familiar with.
Yep.
Sean's the
I
one
mean,
that got me involved with Canixia rosa. When I was at the Fresno Zoo, there was a zookeeper at the San Francisco Zoo that was surplusing some, and Sean said, "Oh, you're really cool." So yeah, like a lot of curators, Sean had a pretty exotic personality, I guess. I don't know, but I got along with him great. Aside from him being a mentor, I considered him a friend. We did
yeah,
activities together that weren't me working at the zoo. We'd go and look at animals in the wild or visit collections, or he was the primary editor of Vivarium, and I used to go to his house and we'd be drinking a beer, looking at article submissions. Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I got something down the wrong pipe. My eyes are all water. Oh, let me check if. Oh man, that was bad. Live TV, man. Can you imagine if you actually had to be on live TV and you started like sneezing during a live newscast or something like that? But oh my god, that'd be something else.
I guess they got plans for that kind of stuff. I mean, you're the
They
camera operator,
they
the
cut
sound
away.
technician, the guy behind the camera, the guy in front of the camera. You're doing like 5 or 6 different roles, Tom, as what would
Heck
be in a
yeah,
live
I'm
TV
check.
show.
I'm the producer checking to see if the guest is active on Facebook. Oh,
So, let's see.
Mikey Ben, thanks for joining us.
Barraquasello, what's your real name, if you don't mind sharing? Or maybe that is your real name.
Yeah.
It sounds like an avatar name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Two Turtle Tom. That's real, right? No. Um,
Yeah.
Patrick says mine love wild lettuce leaf as well as kudzu and bamboo shoots. So I don't know much about bamboo, but is that something you buy or just harvest in your backyard? Um,
Oh, wow.
here's
I don't have any ideas, Wesley, on your question about an allergic thing going on with a tortoise. I read a paper that came out of Germany about star tortoises, and they had a nasal discharge, and the person finally figured out it was mites that were decomposing the wood substrate. Once the guy went to a different substrate where there wasn't decomposing mites, the nasal discharge just cleared up. So he went
that's
back
gross.
and reset up an enclosure without tortoises, and yeah, it's so the yeah, a lot of times we don't think of animals having allergies, but they do, or they can. Um,
But Wes says he meant to send it in a message to someone, but well, we can help too, Wes. So those are the kinds of questions we love to answer. Um, and Podrick says they have Niagara bamboo, or he has Niagara bamboo growing all over his yard. So I don't know that species, um, but I bet it's invasive. Ugh. I'm just not a big bamboo fan. Dragon Lair, sorry. Um, everyone down south has bamboo. She says, I have Alphonse Carr bamboo. That sounds interesting. And she's never tried to feed it to tortoises. But, well, you are a big fan of the backyard harvest.
A big fan of what?
Backyard harvest.
Yeah, well,
Turtle and tortoise meat.
yeah, there's a term called wild crafted, but that sort of seemed a little bougie to me. So I decided I'm gonna go with backyard harvest because it's wild crafted creates in me a image of people interacting with plants in the wild, doing things with them other than just harvesting. Backyard harvest is a little more um, I don't know, straightforward, I guess. And yeah, I've done a lot of backyard harvest, and it relates to people. I mean, it's on the label of products I have. You know, you could mix this with grocery store greens or your own backyard harvest. And a lot of people go foraging in parks and things like that, but a lot of people get a lot of stuff out of their backyard. Um, Mostly what I harvest out of my yard that I feed a lot of is a puncha cactus. Um, and then let's see, Will, speaking of Sean and Chappie, do you know what happened to their Samabetes? Um, you're not in Santa Barbara. Sean was also my mentor and friend, very much missed. Yeah, I missed the hell out of Sean. He was like a lot of fun in a lot of ways. So I think the Samabetes went to the Tennessee or the zoo in Chattanooga, Tennessee, or maybe the Knoxville Zoo. Um, the curator there has done a lot of work with smaller species. When they were at the Philly Zoo, or I'm sorry, the Fresno Zoo, they produced a lot of eggs, and it they were very productive. We got a new group of them one time. Ernst Bard hand carried some from South Africa to the Chaffee Zoo and visited, and um, they have a reputation of being very difficult to care of. But having actually cared for some myself in a relatively simple enclosure, I'd say they're not that difficult to care for at all. Um, yeah, if and when I get settled on buying a property, I'll pursue getting some, and I'll make a building specialized just for them, where the whole building is climate controlled based on their needs. There are a lot of people in Europe. Well, I don't know a lot, but anyways, they're bred commonly in Europe. The Samabetes oculifer, the serrated, and then there's a breeding compound for geometric tortoises. They've had a reputation of being notoriously hard to reproduce, yet there's a breeding compound for them. In South Africa, I found the person on Facebook one time and drilled into their feed, and it's not all so complicated. I would say impressed tortoises are more complicated. To bring back a species we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, we will have to reschedule with Sushmita, and if it doesn't work to do it live, if that's just not a good time, we can always record an episode and show it live, and we can be in the chat and comment. That's possible. Any last thoughts or words? Anything going on with Kapidolo Farms that you'd like to share?
Well, I sort of let the cat out of the bag on buying a property.
Yeah,
Looking to
of
get
exploring.
30 plus acres in Texas, in pretty southern Texas. I looked based on USDA climate maps and other resources like that, like soil survey maps and things, and it's pretty isolated from anything else. But that's okay. It's not like I have a robust social life in real life here. Most of my social life is online, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's significantly further south from where you are. It's I just
Yes.
think of California as so warm and it must be so south, but no, Texas is like really down there.
Well, I looked and the climate is, I mean, I lived in Fresno and Clovis for about 10 years, and the climate's similar to that in terms of extremes of heat and cool. I think it'll be much more humid. I think I'm dodging tornado or hurricane alley by being pretty far inland. Um, so we'll see.
Well, it's good to hear you're feeling better and you're going to be venturing down there, and let us know how it goes, and we'll stay updated to
Yeah,
see
I
if
might do some kind of routine photo update and post it on Capitol Farms Facebook page.
maybe cool. That'd be
Um,
awesome.
yeah, we'll see.
Okay, well, Sushi didn't was not able to join us. I was thinking maybe she was an hour off. Maybe she would pop in at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific, but it looks like we're gonna have to reschedule. As far as next week goes, I'm currently scheduled to be on an airplane. I'm actually going on a cruise, Megan and I, that also just happens to be hosting the Florida Certified Nurse Midwives Annual Conference. And Megan was invited to be a speaker on at that conference, and it just so happens it's on a cruise ship, and I will be going to Coco Cay and Nassau. I've never been on a boat. Um, but Will, thank you so much for joining me. I had a blast as always, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to all the people that signed in and kept the conversation interesting.
Awesome.